So finally, just a few last points about the narrative mode before we leave it and move fully into the descriptive. There are certain techniques that are used or that are elaborated on, manipulated by an author when we're talking about a story or a selection that is developed in this mode. First of all, in regards to style, or what we often refer to as literary elements, figurative language would be one way that you can, as a writer, manipulate in order to have your story come across the way you intend. We're talking about similes, metaphors, yes, but also things like alliteration, metonymy, personification, some of those more sophisticated elements. The voice of narration is a second one that lends to style. It means if you're writing in first person, second person, the voice of narrator, who's telling the story, and that of course gives you a different perspective. If it's a third person omnipotent narrator, they see everything, they know everything, they know what characters are thinking. But if it's a first person narrator, and even if it's limited by a limited narrator, meaning like the narrator of the yellow wallpaper, the voice of narration has a definite impact on how the story comes across to the reader or the listener. Stream of consciousness, when you're looking inside a character's head and you're reading the thoughts that go through their mind. It's not necessarily developed in clear, concise, perfect sentences, and it can be difficult. That can be challenging for lots of readers to follow that stream of consciousness when an author deliberately uses it. More techniques, they say Shura, which is part of Beowulf and Old English only. That is a break in the middle of a line. It was there to aid memory. It's no longer used in modern day, at least to my knowledge. Parody is another element. Parody is when you tell a story for the purposes of reflecting on a more original one or a well-known one. The parody usually uses humor to show something about a life lesson or a moral lesson or value of people. Satire, a more sophisticated use of humor. Satire is the deliberate exaggeration or ridicule in order to get a reaction from the reading audience. So Rick Mercer, for example, 22 Minutes, those shows that are comedies, they use satire a great deal, and it's usually aimed at politicians or events of the day that are happening, historical events, etc. Satire is done so the reader has the reaction, or the viewer has the reaction of what when they're finished watching or reading something. They feel motivated to take action, and that is the mark of well-developed satire. Pathos is the creation of deliberate sympathy for characters or situations. A lot of our Canadian authors are very, very good at this. They create a story, they create a situation where the reader automatically feels sorry for the people. There's a sense of their life is difficult, there might be a tragedy, something they're trying to work through, and we get pulled in as the reader if the element of pathos in the narrative mode is created and used effectively. Pathetic fallacy, a sophisticated element. It is when the elements of nature mirror emotions of characters. One of my favorite Canadian authors, Sinclair Ross, uses this very, very well in his stories. For example, if a character is sad, it starts to rain softly. If a character is angry, there might be a wicked thunderstorm that comes up. If a character is worried or anxiety-ridden, there might be a winter blizzard outside. You see that very often, especially in Canadian writers. They tend to use that element a great deal. Finally, some narrative techniques that are related to plot more so than style. These are probably more familiar to you as students that have come through high school. First of all, flashback, when a character recalls or remembers something from the past, and they usually remember it with greater understanding. It in some way always connects to what's going on in the present. Foreshadowing, the hinting of things that are about to come, so the author will put little clues down. If you're a perceptive reader, you'll pick up on those clues, you'll add them up together, and you'll come to some conclusion about something that they were trying to warn you about or prepare you for. A narrative hook is usually found in the early part of a story. A narrative hook is just exactly what it says. It hooks you, it gets you interested, it engages you in what's happening, and you go fishing to find the rest of the storyline. A red herring is planted in a story if an author wants to put you off on the wrong track for a little while. This is especially true in stories that are detective stories or mystery stories, something like that. Sherlock Holmes was one author that was well known for planting red herrings in his selections. Narrative techniques is related to theme, and these are ones that we will see coming across more of literature in a big way. First of all, the concept of poetic justice. This is a narrative technique where the story teaches us a lesson about human behavior and the human condition. Poetic justice is defined as when people get what they deserve. So good people are rewarded, bad people are punished. Shakespeare used this in all of his tragic hero stories, where you have a character that chooses something and they unfortunately don't always learn that there's a consequence to the choices they make. An allegory, a story that parallels another one. So an allegory might use an old fairy tale or a children's story and recreate it in a modern context. You have to know the original story in order to fully understand the allegory when you come across it. Irony, the difference between what is expected and what actually occurs. There are 3 types of irony: verbal, situational, and dramatic. Verbal irony is when a character says something but it has greater meaning. In speech, it often comes across as sarcasm. Situational irony is when something happens in a story you did not see coming. One of the stories we do in this course is called The Story of an Hour, and you will see the element of irony is used there. Finally, dramatic irony, when a character or an actor on stage is not aware of something that the reader or the audience is aware of. So there's a bit of lost information there, that if the character or the actor only knew, they would see things turning out quite differently from how the events go. Finally, I think that wraps it up for the narrative mode. Hopefully you've learned some important things and you'll be able to apply them to your own writing as well as further reading that we do in the course.